We are here today to give you some information about the Food is Medicine movement. It's actually an initiative here at Maine Health. And the title today, if you might remember from last year's talk, it's Food is Medicine, Chronic Diseases, which is sort of an update in addition to last year's talk if you were there. However, if you were not at last year's talk, don't worry, I cover the highlights and then move on to new content. So going to our first slide. Wouldn't be a presentation without an objective slide, but we're going to cover some basic definitions just so you know when I start throwing around some of this terminology what I'm talking about, what actually is a protein, a fat, a carb. As a MD who works upstairs in the family medicine office, I do have to cover how to review the literature and understand what you're reading, because you're going to go out there and you're going to see other studies that maybe conflict with what I say, and I want you to understand how to make that decision about which one is more trustworthy. And then again, that 4-part Food is Medicine series we did last year, that was actually videotaped and it is on YouTube. If you go to the Midcoast Hospital YouTube channel and search for, at the time it was called Food as Medicine, but Food as Medicine, and it was the what to eat, why we eat, how to eat, and when not to eat lectures. That is all still videotaped if you want a refresher. I obviously cannot cover all of those 4 2-hour lectures each content in this slide, but I do my best to do quick definitions. Also important before we get started is understanding the name change. So it was Food as Medicine last year. Food is Medicine is the official term. And that's not just coming from me, that's coming from a Maine Health-wide initiative. And that doesn't, although it does include education, lectures like this and other topics throughout the offices and handouts we give to patients, they also are funding research, policy efforts. If you've seen your primary care doctor within the Maine Health system, most likely you've had food insecurity screening questions where we asked about if you need any money or help getting food. We actually have food bags that we give to people if they are low on food or screen positive on those screeners. And we've even gone further. Maine Health has food pantries set up at Maine Medical Center in Portland, also in Farmington and Norway. And I just heard news that Parkview is going to have some version of that as well, where food insecure people can come in, do a little bit of shopping, and bring that home. I don't have any details on that yet. I just heard about that myself. So again, these lectures kind of tie into this larger Food is Medicine initiative at Maine Health. There is a website. It's still a little empty right now, but more content coming soon where you can try to find some of this information about pantries and foods and such. All right, any questions on introductions or anything before I get into the content? We're good, okay. All right, so many of you probably remember the old food pyramids back from the 1980s and 90s and such. That's all been replaced by MyPlate. Now I have to confess, MyPlate does not often look like this plate. It's hard to do this. It's something we strive for. Half fruits and vegetables. I grew up in an Italian household, so it was an entire plate of pasta with like 1 or 2 vegetables put on with some tomato sauce. That's kind of what I grew up. And then, oh wait, hang on, a protein. Let's throw some chicken on the side, right? So that's often the plate that I would grow up with. And then some dairy in there as well. It doesn't not mean that every single meal needs to be like this, but this is a good ratio to have in your head when you're making your plate. It's like, oh shoot, yeah, I don't have enough fruits and veggies on this plate. I'll try to do better next time, right? So just think about these ratios going forward. So going into each of the items on that plate, when I say protein, what do you think? Go ahead and shout something out.
Chicken meat. Tofu.
Chicken meat. Ooh, I like that somebody said tofu. So, and beans, yeah. So I was raised chicken and meat. And so when I think of the word protein, this is what I think of, right? Slab of meat, there we go, that's where you get protein. That is not what I want you to always think. I mean, yes, that is protein, and yes, it is an okay source of protein to have, but that is not the source of protein. There are many other sources of protein, and arguably some of them are healthier than this source of protein. I want you to think about more images like this. So, certainly our chicken, but also our fish, our seafood. Nuts and legumes have a lot of seafood. Beans, lentils, those have a lot of protein. So we really want to be looking for plant-based proteins as well as our animal-based proteins. So when you're looking at that MyPlate, it doesn't have to be a thing of chicken there. It could be pasta with a bunch of kidney beans roasted in there with some other things. So it is okay to have plant-based proteins in there as well. What are proteins actually? The way to simply remember this is the Legos of your body, the building blocks. If you were to try to build yourself up, you would need a bunch of proteins to do so. And these are the fundamental building blocks that build our structure, they store things. Actually, hormones are literally built out of proteins. All of our antibodies to fight off infections are made of proteins, enzymes, receptors, transport, and then of course muscle. We all know that our muscle is protein, but there's just so much more to protein in our body as well. What does it actually look like? If you're into biochemistry, here's a quick picture. I won't belabor the details of biochemistry. Most of you are probably not biology majors, but amino acids are essentially the tiny little Lego pieces. And they've got funny names like leucine and cysteine and such. There's over 20 amino acids in our body. And when you build them up and put them in a little train, then they can fold into all of these cool sheets. We've got alpha helices, beta plated sheets, and that's how they build all the things in your body, is all these cool complex structures. And they can actually like move and chomp, so antibodies and enzymes will move if one thing attaches, neat things like that. Bonus points if anybody knows what protein this is in the human body. I'll be very impressed if you recognize this.
Is it the purple protein because it's red and blue?
Good guess. Actually, last year somebody guessed this and I almost fell down. This is hemoglobin. So this is a thing in all of your red blood cells, and you can see the heme and the oxygen connected in those 4 little spots there, and without that, we'd all be dead. We need that in order to breathe every day. It's circulating in our red bloodstream all the time. And there are billions of proteins in your body. All right, fat. When I say fat, what comes to mind? Cheese, butter, olive oil. Good, all right. Some of you attended my lecture last year. I like this. When I think fat, I think this, right? This is the layman term. Before you go to a nutrition talk, you kind of, all right, I'm fat. I want to get rid of the fat, right? Just like protein is not the meat, it's the plant and animal. There is more to fat. This is what I want you to think of when you think of fats and foods. And yes, there is the cheese and butter and milk, and even the red meats have a fair amount of fat in them as well. That's why they're always getting a bad rap. There's a lot of other fats. We've got our oils, avocados, our seafood. Actually, nuts and seeds have a lot of fats as well. And again, fat gets a bad rap. We think of fat as this negative thing, but there are good fats. So what are fats chemically? They're basically our energy storage. When we eat a little extra and then we know we're not going to be able to eat for a few hours or a few days or whatever it might be, this is where we store things. It's not just energy, though. It also can store vitamins and nutrients, so we do need fat to survive. Also can generate some heat. Although I said hormones are made of proteins, they are also made of fat, so we do need fats for our hormones. And then even more fundamental, every cell in your body has something called a phospholipid bilayer, which is basically fat that surrounds it. So without fat, you can't have a cell. So again, you need fat to live. And then our nerves are actually, the way we conduct electricity down the nerves has to skip down, and fat helps insulate that, so that way it works fast and well. And you can actually move your toe when you decide to move your toe. In fact, there's a disease called multiple sclerosis, where we make antibodies against the myelin sheath. That's that fatty insulator. And if anybody here in the audience knows somebody who has multiple sclerosis, especially if it's more advanced, and nowadays we have better treatments for it, but back in the day, you're in a wheelchair. You can barely talk or move. And that's, again, thank you to the fat that allows that signal to be conducted quickly. Biochemically, this is what I was just talking about. This is those layers that go around every cell in your body. That's the nodes of Ranvier and our myelin sheath, all the fat on our nerves that conduct things everywhere. And then the 3 basic type of lipids, that's the other word for fat. So if you see the word lipid, that's fat. Phospholipids, triglycerides is another type of fat. You can see the difference between a phospholipid and a triglyceride is just how many tails it has. And then cholesterol, that is also a fat. We'll be talking about that later in the talk. So very quick family tree. How are these fats all related? First step, again, just understanding the terminology here. You've probably all heard the word saturated fat. That sound familiar to people in the audience? And then there's the unsaturated fats on the different side of the family. So saturated fats are, they're okay. They're not, I wouldn't maybe have them in excess all the time, but these are the ones that are heavily found in our butters, our cheeses, our meats, our milks. It gets a very bad rap, and for partially good reasons. A ton of excess saturated fat has been linked to certain strokes and other diseases. It was a little over-exaggerated in its claims a few years, a decade or so ago. You would think that if you had a saturated fat, you'd drop dead of a heart attack the next day. It's not quite that dramatic, but certainly an excess over many years does increase your risk by a little bit. But there's also some health benefits to cheeses and such. So it's not to say that you should never have saturated fats, but don't go crazy on them. Everything in moderation. I do believe in that. Unsaturated fats get a little bit more complicated. Has anybody heard the words monounsaturated, polyunsaturated or trans fat. Trans fat you might have heard of. So trans fat was this invention that they made, again, a few decades ago. And for a while, the industry loved it. It's stable, it can sit on a shelf forever and never expire, it's easy to make food, it's cheap. That's probably a hint that it's not very good for you. And sure enough, shortly after trans fat hit the market and was started being widely consumed, we started seeing more heart attacks and more problems, and that one has been strong, much more than saturated fat. Trans fat has been strongly linked to lots of heart diseases and cardiovascular events. So that one is largely banned from the food industry now. So you should not really be able to buy and eat a trans fat, although it does hide in some ingredient labels, if I'm not mistaken.
If it's less than 5%,
Here, go ahead.
if it's less than 5%, 0.5%, it could still be in the food, but it is working its way out. It's being outlawed, basically.
Excellent, okay. How can we tell if it's in that less than 5%? Is there any hints on the label?
Yeah, if you see the word partially hydrogenated oils, so you look for those.
All right, so that's trans fats. Stay away from those, and hopefully we'll be gone from food forever. And then we have our mono and polyunsaturated fats. So what are those? And for any of you who really love biochemistry, I couldn't help but put it in the slides. You can see the difference between a saturated fat is that it's saturated with hydrogens. It's all full. This is you know what, I don't need to explain the basics of organic chemistry, but here you can see an extra double line here. That's an extra bond with one less hydrogen. And here you have many more of them. So these are, for lack of a better word, kinky fats. I'm drawing them as a nice straight line, but they're kind of kinks and they move around more, so they're not that shelf-stable solid that can sit there. They're much more fluidy and liquidy with the biochemistry. But let's talk monounsaturated fats. So that is our, for lack of a better word, I simplify it for my kids, the healthy fats, or olive oils, or avocados, or nuts and seeds. You know, these fats, you really don't have to worry about limiting. I mean, certainly, again, don't go to, you can even die of water if you have excess of water, but you don't need to worry so much about limiting these as you do for some of the saturated fats. Our polyunsaturated fats are divided into two categories. Who's heard of an omega-6 or an omega-3 fatty acid? Yeah, there we go. So that's part of why I wanted to show this. Like, okay, what are these concepts? How do they relate? So our omega-3 and omega-6s, I put stars here because these are what we call an essential fat. Most fats our bodies can make in that we eat sugar. Oops, it was too much. We need to convert it to fat. But there are two fats that our body cannot make. And without it, we would die. And that is omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. So we do need to get these from food, which is why everybody's always talking about these. Oh, make sure you get it, as we do need to consume it in our food. When you look at what these are, our omega-6 fatty acids are very commonly found in walnuts and many of the vegetable and soybean oils. While omega-3s, and this is the one you probably hear the most about in the media, is our seafood, the salmon, all the seafood stuff, and then these pictures right here are chia seeds and flax seeds. We'll be talking more about flaxseed later. Now, although both of these are essential, and you do need some, there are studies that show that omega-6 fatty acids are a little bit more inflammatory. They can cause a little bit more inflammation in your body. So again, while it's okay, you don't maybe want to go crazy on it and like just drink vegetable oil. I haven't really had anybody have a problem with too much omega-3 fatty acid, though. That's actually an anti-inflammatory compound, so it's hard to go wrong on the omega-3s. So you can have as much seafood or chia or flax seeds as you want. That one's okay. This one isn't a randomized study, but there are studies to suggest that our ratios are all off right now. If you consume it naturally in your diet, you can imagine it takes a long time to go into the fields and eat enough vegetables to get enough oil to concentrate all the omega-6s. And it's much easier to get it in one shrimp for an omega-3. But now that we have these modern inventions and we can take fields of soybeans and compress them and get all the omega-6s into a concentrated oil, cooking only with vegetable oil all the time can give you way more omega-6s than we naturally used to get in the diet. And so there is some thought process that we're getting too many omega-6s and not enough omega-3s. That's part of the reason you'll hear people say, oh, try to cook a little less with vegetable oils and a little bit more with our olive or avocado oils. It's skipping the whole omega-6 conundrum where there might be too much of the inflammatory molecule and going for just a safe monounsaturated fat. That's some of the reasoning behind that. Yes, I see a question.
Is the omega-6 necessary in our diet, or do we get it naturally anyway?
The question is omega-6 essential naturally in a diet. And yes, I believe, I have never seen an omega-6 deficiency. Just by eating food, you will usually get enough omega-6. So that one's fine. Omega-3s, if you're not eating any seafood at all, yeah, I'm sure some people are a little low on that one. So that's why you hear lots of people harping on omega-3, omega-3, omega-3 all the time. And there's some good studies about it as well. All right, carbohydrates or carbs. What do you think of when I say carb? Bread. Exactly, and I heard somebody else that listened to my talk last year, but bread, right? That's what I think of when I hear carb. You might be surprised to hear that these are also carbs. How is that, right? Okay, so bread, yeah. Maybe a sweet potato, yep, I've heard that that's carby, or a banana, but an apple, blueberries, milk, how is that a carb, right? It's not how I was raised. Carb was the pasta that we had on our plate. So the answer to how are these all carbs lies in the actual definition, the biochemical definition. Carbohydrates literally are sugar. We call it glucose in the medical field, but glucose sugar is a carb. If there is a bunch of sugar in something, there are carbs in it. So that's a very simple definition. And what is sugar? It is the energy in our body. Although sugar gets a bad rap, we do need sugar to survive. Glucose is how all of our cells function. That's why we eat, is to get some sugar so we can function. However, I know nobody with a sugar deficiency. It just doesn't exist. Sugar's in everything. So looking at the biochemistry of sugar, and this is important because we're going to go into these details later on. I'm going to be harping on about fiber. So if you get an actual molecule of sugar, this is what it looks like on a biochemical basis. A little hexagon with some hydroxyl groups coming off of it. And like I said, that feeds our basic cells. Without sugar, you're dead in 6 minutes, if you somehow could turn off all the sugar in your body. When you take that sugar, that glucose, and you string it end to end and end like a choo-choo train and put on some branches, that's now what we call a starch. So if you've heard this term starch, that's a starch. Well, it's just a bunch of sugars together, which is why when you have that wonderful muffin or wonderful white bread and you put it on your tongue, it tastes sweet because the salivary amylase on your tongue immediately cleaves this bond and it turns into sugar and it tastes sweet. So that's why we all love carbs and all the muffins and pastries and everything we eat. So those are starches. I'll skip over glycogen. This is how we store it in our liver. But then you can see this looks completely different. And unlike the choo-choo train with branches, stick stuff here, you can see the glucose in that fiber picture, the cellulose, that's a plant sugar essentially. It has bonds not just side to side, but it has up and down to make it a true grid. And that's what makes a fiber a healthy sugar. Because fiber is actually sugar, as you can see, it's just a grid of sugar. But fiber is a quote-unquote healthy sugar, while starch is a less healthy sugar. Because starch immediately turns into sugar, and in our gut, we can only actually cleave the side-to-side bonds. So then we're still stuck with these other up and down bonds that our body can't digest. Who knows what digests this up and down bonds in fiber? Who remembers from last year's?
Termites?
Say again?
She said termites.
Termites. I'm sure they do. Close though, our microbiome. So that's all the bacteria that live in it's mostly in our gut. We do have bacteria on our skin and such as well. But the microbiome, simply put, there's a little kid's book that I like to quote to my kids. It's the buddies in your belly. So when you eat, and you eat sugar, the buddies aren't fed. Those healthy microbiome that we've evolved with over years and years, we already digested and absorbed the sugar, and so the wrong bacteria grow and start producing the wrong enzymes and such. But if you eat fiber, you're feeding the buddies in your belly, and they're able to eat this healthy fiber, and then they produce good enzymes that then help our body get better, and so on and so forth. It might surprise you to know that we actually have more bacteria in and on our body than we do have human cells in our body. I want to say that again. I mean, trillions of bacteria in us. And we always think of bacteria as a bad thing, but these are healthy bacteria that have co-evolved with us over tens of thousands of years. So much so that if I could give you a pill and wipe out your entire microbiome, you would be deathly ill. Like, we need these bacteria to survive. And so you can imagine that we have closely co-evolved where we actually have systems where if we eat the right foods, and the right foods meaning, imagine you're eating an indigenous diet running around the plains of Africa. It's a lot of seeds and natural things and legumes and beans and such, very fiber heavy diet. Our bacteria in our gut learned that, if I eat the fiber and I produce things that make you run to go get more fiber, then we are now co-evolving to help each other out. And so one of the mechanisms here is if you eat the fiber and it feeds the buddies in your belly, they start producing certain enzymes, PYY1 and et cetera, and that goes into your intestinal epithelium and that makes some more enzymes. One of them is called GLP-1. Who knows what GLP-1 is? Ozempic. Literally, if you eat a lot of fiber, you will make your body's own GLP-1. You don't need to take a drug. Well, some people do. As an MD, I've prescribed lots of Ozempic, so I don't want to knock that at all. But a high fiber diet will increase your body's own natural production of GLP-1. So you don't always have to have such as high a dose, or maybe the dose at all, if you have a high fiber diet. So you could say that fiber is nature's Ozempic. Or probably more accurately, Ozempic is trying to be fiber. But it's hard to get a lot of fiber. Not everybody can eat a lot of fiber. But that is a natural way that, and I should mention for those of you who don't know much about Ozempic, that GLP-1 agonist, turning on that GLP-1 hormone, that goes to our brain and says, I'm kind of full. I don't really want to eat anything else right now. It goes to our gut and slows it down. So if you overeat, you get nauseous. These are all the side effects of Ozempic. I tell all my patients it's really more the mechanism of action of Ozempic. That's what GLP-1 is supposed to do. So that's some very basic biochemistry, but we're going to harp on that a lot later in the talk. So I wanted to make sure we made that point here. All right, we are going to take a quick break because although this talk is about food as medicine, at some point I'm going to give a lecture called Exercise as Medicine, because arguably exercise is even more important than food when you look at the evidence. So one of 3 breaks, just going to be like a 1 minute. Go ahead and stand up and stretch, just right in your seat. Adults should move more and sit less. Something is better than nothing. So choose however you want to stretch, arms up, side to side, if you can, touch your toes, whatever it might be. If you can't get up, that's okay. You don't have to get up, but it is good if you can. Oh, yep. There we go. And then the next break, we're going to go grab some of that yummy food sitting over there. So I'll get your steps in it then. All right. And if somebody needs to run to the bathroom, that's totally okay. You can run out anytime as you want. All right. You do not have to run. Okay. If you're feeling slightly stretched out, that's good. We got some blood moving. All right. Getting into part 2 of the talk here, looking at the evidence. So before we dive into the actual studies, I do again have to give you a quick primer on evidence-based medicine. For those of you who were here last year, this is a quick repeat, so pardon my repeating myself. Randomized controlled trials. If you are learning a new health fact and you are going to really change your activities and what you're doing based on it, try to make it from a randomized controlled trials. Those are the ones that truly randomize people and can more conclusively say that something is the cause of another thing. If you see the term systematic review or network meta-analysis, that's a really good term too. That means they went through and pulled a bunch of different studies and put them all together, so it gets the power of many. But you could have a systematic review of cohorts, so make sure it's a meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials, or RCTs. You'll see me use that acronym throughout the talk, RCT, for randomized controlled trial. Now, I say here, avoid observational and cohort data whenever possible. I say whenever possible because sometimes you can't randomize a study to really prove one thing happens over another. It's hard to force groups of people for decades to eat one thing or another. And so we don't always have good randomized controlled trials. So if you have to do cohort data, that's okay, but try to find the randomized data when you can. Correlation is not causation. It turns out most of the media posts, things you see on the internet, even things that come in my news feed and my medical news feed, most of it's cohort data. And so I read it and say, yeah, okay, whatever, and I delete it because I can't change much of my practice on that. Yeah.
So are there trusted sites on, like, I think Wiki is not, right? So are
Where?
there trusted sites that you could pass along for people trying to?
Excellent question. Somebody asked that last year. I should have put that on the slide. So the question is, are there trusted websites where you can go try to find some of this information? So there's different levels of education. So for sort of public-facing information, the CDC, as long as it doesn't involve STDs or vaccines right now, there's some suspicious changes happening on the CDC website right now. But outside of that, CDC, NIH, A lot of Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins, the big hospital names will have a lot of really good patient-facing information.
myplate.gov.
Oh, yeah.
myplate.gov, diabetes.org, kidney.org. Those are some good ones too.
Yep. So all of those will be good ones for sort of patient-facing information. For somebody like myself who wants to dive a little deeper, they won't usually cite in those patient informations about what's cohort, what's randomized, et cetera. You really have to dive into the literature, which, if you want to, go ahead, it's wonderful, but it is tricky if you don't have some medical background or some willingness to jump into some statistical terms. It can be daunting. If you are willing to jump into the medical literature, by far my favorite source is something called PubMed, PubMed. PubMed. If you type in PubMed, you'll go to it, and you can type in your search terms, and you get a lot of very heavily medical dense articles, and it will declare whether it's an RCT or a cohort and what the findings are. If you're not quite sure you understand it, but you think it might be really important to you, that's something you can sometimes print out and bring to your doctor and ask about your condition. I like it when patients bring in actual articles. When they bring in a magazine article, I'm like, all right, what kind of data is this? But they bring in, I've had a few patients come in, yeah, here's a meta-analysis of 35 randomized controlled trials on this. Like, yeah, I'll do that. It's really good evidence. You've convinced me. So if you're willing to dive into the literature, PubMed is a really good place that I look for that. Yeah.
Could you just repeat what cohort, what you're meaning
Yes.
by that and what that would be?
So observational and cohort data is just when you have a big group of people and you just see what happens over time. You're not actually doing something to them and comparing it to another group. You're just saying, oh, this half of the people that we watched ate more this, and this half of the people ate more that, so maybe this could be causing that. Which sounds very tempting, but I'm glad you asked that. That segues into my next point. We're going to give it an example. So who here likes ice cream? Yeah, even giving this talk, I still like ice cream and have it. All right, and who is waiting and wishing for a little bit more sunshine right now? I'm about done with winter. I enjoyed it, but I'm just about on the other side of it right now. So in my pretend observational cohort data, I watched a whole year and I said, I really like ice cream and I really like sunshine. So let me try to make an inference from this. Maybe if I eat more ice cream, I can make the sun come faster. Then it'll be warmer quicker. Let's do it, right? So you can see the problem with trying to make this correlation is causation thing. They are linked, obviously, but not in quite that way. And not until you design a randomized controlled trial where I say, okay, this half of the audience is going to eat as much ice cream as they can all the time, and we'll see if the sun comes out faster for you guys. And this side, don't eat as much ice cream. Like, skip it, and let's see if it takes longer for the sun to come out. And only when I do that test do I say, oh, shoot, sun didn't happen any more often. Guess it's not really a causation. But actually, harms can come when you try to make that correlation leap, because in the group that ate more ice cream, now we got a bunch more cavities, right? So that's where the danger really lies in this cohort data. Is sometimes you can infer really helpful things, but sometimes it has nothing to do with each other. So I spend a lot of time in my clinic trying to figure out, is this cohort data, dispelling some of those myths, et cetera. A real life example of that is peanut butter and kids. Who here remembers being told, wait as long as you can before you give your kid peanut butter? Allergies, careful, right? So that was a common thing for many, many decades. And that completely changed 10 years ago. So it was a lot of observational data. You give the kid peanut butter, they start having an allergic reaction. Oh my gosh, we should wait longer. And until they're older and they can handle it. But now we know from a randomized controlled trial that came out of Israel, actually, where they give these like Bamba peanut butter puffs to their kids from a very young age. And there was like half the amount of allergies there. So they did an RCT and proved definitively that the younger you give peanut butter, the less likely they are to be allergic. And they have proved that in like dozens of RCTs at this point. So now I take care of kids as well as adults as a family doctor. When I see my kids at 4 months of age, is what these studies say, I say, hey, they're not ready for all the solids yet, but I want you to get a little tiny lick of peanut butter and a little tiny lick of egg, and just introduce that once a day. Just let them lick it and taste it, get exposed to the allergens. And we are seeing a lot less allergies because of those two foods. It's probably true for others, but the RCTs we have are on egg and peanut butter specifically. So again, that's cohort data, getting it wrong for decades, and we have a lot more peanut allergies because of it. Now, despite all of that, I love RCTs. We do need to keep in mind that all of us are individual and all of us are different. I could read you a great RCT about how great, actually there is one about, actually I think it is a cohort, but drinking more milk is gonna be great for your health, build your bones, drink more milk. But if you're lactose intolerant, please don't drink more milk. You're going to feel sick as a dog, right? So you do have to take that RCT in those studies and apply it to your health and your body and also your preferences. Although there's a lot of things that we could be doing, sometimes you just don't like the food and you don't want to learn to like it. So add a little dose of reality there as well. All right, any questions on evidence-based medicine before we start diving into some of the evidence-based medicine?
So I got a question.
Yeah.
Those berries and the carbohydrates, you said strawberries and blueberries,
Say that again, something about strawberries and blueberries?
right? Is it good?
Oh, yes. So, well, actually, we're going to cover that in some of the later slides, but sugar, it depends on how you have it. Sometimes it's a good sugar, and we certainly need sugar to survive, but if you get too much of that sugar concentrated in a nutrient not dense food, then it's a bad sugar.
Kidney stage 3, and I was told I could eat blueberries and strawberries and pineapple, and I've been doing that because I can't eat the junk food because...
Yep. And I'll cover that later, but in short, I have never seen somebody get sick from eating fruit. Never. I've never seen diabetes get worse from eating fruit. I've never seen kidney disease get worse by eating fruit. Now, there are certain select diseases, for example, dialysis patients, there are very specific diets because of certain nutrients they have to follow. And for that, please talk to your nephrologist. That's a kidney doctor. But in general, if you've got just, for example, stage 3 kidney disease, which is not nearly as bad as it sounds, you can eat fruit. I tell my diabetics all the time, it's okay to eat fruit. It's way better than the junk food. My goodness, please eat the fruit. All right, so we've got 3 main health topics that we're going to talk about today. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, and high blood sugar, which is diabetes. We're going to talk about using food as your medicine in order to help treat these diseases. So starting with hypertension, and then we'll have our little break again. So hypertension, AKA high blood pressure.
Get rid of stress.
Certainly a lot of things can increase your blood pressure, and stress is one of them. White coat hypertension is one I see every day. People come in. I don't even wear white. I wore this all day, and I still had somebody who dropped 40 points when I left the room. I guess I'm still stressing them out after years of taking care of them, but it happens. It's all right. So when you see that number, it's always one number slash and then another number. The top number is your systolic, and the bottom number is your diastolic. Imagine you have a garden hose. That's our arteries. And every time you turn on the water, right, the water rushes in, and the pressure of the water on that hose wall when it's first coming out, that's the systolic. That's when your heart pumps and is pushing that blood out. And then if you turn the hose off and the water suddenly subsides and there's only a little bit of pressure on the hose now, that's the diastolic. And that's when our heart is recovering and getting ready for the next beat. So that's the systolic and diastolic. And 120/80 is our perfect normal. It is okay to be lower than that. I have some people who are in the 110s, even the low 100s. I have a couple of people who are even in the upper 90s. They just walk around and they're happy and healthy like that. That's totally fine. We start getting worried when it gets higher. And this actually changed a few years ago. It used to be just 140/90 was concerning, but they've now redefined it where anything above 130/80 is stage 1 hypertension. And then anything over 140/90 is stage 2 hypertension. And with this new definition, we have a lot more hypertensive in this country. Now, there is a grade of difference. It's better to be stage 1 than stage 2. But even just this slight increase in blood pressure, you can imagine, again, if you have that water hose and you turn it on, if you turn it on to even just a slightly higher pressure and you let them both run for 100 years, one's going to spring a leak sooner than the other one is, right? It's just more pressure over that time. So that's why even these slight increases over time. So when people come in and they're at 150, some people really start getting worried. I say, yes, it's reason to worry, but you are not going to have a heart attack today. This takes 10, 20, 30 years to start accumulating this damage. So we've got some time to get this down. Sometimes when people are going through a very stressful period, I say, you know what, we're just going to stop checking your blood pressure for the next 3 months. Let's let this stressful period go by. And then we'll worry about it later this year when we have more time and capability to attack it. Sometimes it just can't be the priority in health. But that's blood pressure in a nutshell.
Somebody else, cholesterol.
We'll talk about cholesterol next, but sorry, what was your question?
So the blood pressure, I understand 120/80. What if it's the top number is high, but the bottom number is 80?
Is fine.
Or-
So we pay a little more attention to the top number. Although the bottom number does matter, the top number matters a little more, arguably. And so that's why I really pay attention to the 130/140 and more. Technically, if you're a 132, but your bottom number is fine, I still call it stage 1 because the 130 is what matters. If you're a 135 over 92, I would still call it stage 2 because now your bottom number has gone that high. So these definitions do stand as is. But excellent question. And by the way, that was asking about 80 versus 90 and the systolic and diastolic numbers. Yeah.
At what point does low become a concern?
Yeah, so again, I've seen people in the 90s systolic walking around happy. Usually by the 80s, most of us are getting pretty nervous. And 70s to 60s, I'm usually transferring somebody to the intensive care unit. So at that level, maybe not so good. But it also depends on the person. So if you normally run at 150, and then suddenly we drop you down to 90, you're gonna feel miserable. You might be passing out. So while 90 might be an okay number for some people, that's too low for you, right? So there is a little bit of talk to the person, see if they're getting lightheaded and dizzy or passing out. We won't alarm it unless you start saying you're feeling dizzy though. My older folks, anything under 100 makes me a little nervous because people do tend to get dizzy at that level. All right, excellent questions. That was saying, what about too low, if I didn't repeat the question. All right, we're gonna do a poll. Which of the following is the most effective treatment for hypertension? Is it 10 milligrams of lisinopril, a standard starting dose for a blood pressure med? Is it 4 tablespoons of that weird powdery stuff that's actually ground flaxseed? Is it doing exercise? Is it the DASH diet, which you might have heard about? Or is it salt substitutes that are actually sodium-free? Who says number 1? Who says number 2? Got a couple guesses. Who says number 3? A little bit more. Who says number 4? Only 1 or 2. And how about number 5? Not so much. So according to the randomized controlled studies, and if you're into literature, it's all on the back page of your packets, and I've got it summarized here. And these are mostly meta-analyses of randomized controlled trials, so I can stand by this as good data. It's actually a two-way tie. And although this talk is about food as medicine, and I do firmly believe that many of us can use food as medicine, sometimes even when you do everything right, it's just a genetic cause of your high blood pressure, and you just need some meds. So although maybe with all this stuff we can reduce some meds, some people are still going to need meds. They are very powerful. So you can get just from a starting dose of lisinopril a 10-point drop. It does depend on your mechanism of action, though. Many of you guessed the flaxseed is technically the correct answer here in using food. Very closely tied with exercise, though, so you weren't completely wrong there. Let me get the question there, because I'm going to.
4 tablespoons.
Four.
What's the time period?
4 tablespoons a day. Thank you for clarifying that.
You weren't supposed to have more than 2 tablespoons.
She was pointing out you aren't supposed to have more than 2 tablespoons of flaxseed a day. I am not aware of that rule. Is that something you're aware of?
Is there a reason why you know why it reports that you shouldn't have more than 4 tablespoons or 2 tablespoons?
Oh, your doctor said that. Okay. I would encourage your doctor to send me the article that says that it's not safe to have more than 2 tablespoons of flaxseed a day. It's probably a cohort study. I can say that this randomized trial, and you again can go into all the details, most of these RCTs only lasted a few months, less than a year, because again, it's hard to force people to eat certain things for certain amounts of time. But at least for that group, doing it for that number of months, completely safe, no side effects, and dropped their blood pressure 10 points. So I'm just curious to see what study they were citing. Hang on, let me finish, because I'm probably going to answer some of these questions when I do my detailed analysis. So let me do my details, and then we'll come back to that. So a little bit more about each of these facts, because I can see you all are itching, like, what? That's causing that? So like I said, the lisinopril medications are powerful, and it goes up. You can actually get more like a 15 or higher point drop for multiple meds or 20 milligrams of lisinopril. So again, if you need meds, that's okay. They are powerful. I prescribe them every day. The flaxseed comment that we were just having. So again, 4 tablespoons, which is a lot if you've ever tried to have it. You don't have to get the full 10-point drop, you need to do 4 tablespoons a day. But if you can only do half of that, that's still some benefit. If you go into the details of the article and look at all the graphs and curves, you can see the actual analysis of different amounts. Some notes about that ground flaxseed. It does need to be pretty freshly ground. The special chemicals and phytooxidants in the flaxseed start oxidizing rapidly, which basically means that oxygen gets into them and makes them less effective. So the longer it's out in the air, the less it's going to actually help. So your options are to buy it and immediately put it in the fridge or freezer, so that way it's trying to keep as shelf stable as possible, buying the pre-ground stuff. Or if you're really I tried this, and I don't think it's going to be me. You're really gung-ho, you can buy the actual flax seeds and then get mortar and pestle style, like, grind it up yourself. It's intense. Now, I think you can do a coffee grinder. No, yeah, you can do a coffee grinder. That's a little easier, probably. So that would be one way to do it as well. And unfortunately, they have proven in these studies supplements don't work, and probably because of the oxidation things. If you throw in a pill and take it, it's not going to work the same way. Yes, what was your question?
How less effective would it be when you buy ground flaxseed in a bag?
So if you buy ground flaxseed in a bag, they didn't study that particular question of how fast does it oxidize. I'm sure there's some studies about that I did not review. I would say you're still probably getting most of the benefit, but if it's the bag in the back of the shelf and the expiration date's only a month away, you're probably not getting nearly as much benefit, right? So try to pick the fresher bag and then freeze it right away would be my tip there. Store it in the freezer. Nutritionist approved. All right, and then again, exercise is phenomenal. 8-point drop from exercises, and specifically the study, and this was a massive study if I'm remembering right, it was like 270 randomized controlled trials. Isometric exercises and running are by far the most beneficial, a good 8-point drop on these studies. Now, other exercises are still good, more like a 4 to 6-point drop, but if you're really trying to target your blood pressure specifically, you get a couple extra points for isometric and running. The DASH diet. If you haven't heard of the DASH diet, it's basically the Mediterranean diet with some extra information about salt and potassium. And if you really kind of take the rest of the DASH diet away, it's really just the low salt, high potassium diet. Like that's really what the DASH diet is trying to teach you. And specifically the targets for the DASH diet, although you don't have to be quite this extreme, but if you want the full 7-point drop, this is the way to get it, is less than 1,500 milligrams of sodium and greater than 3,500 milligrams of potassium, which is harder to do than you think. And we'll cover that in the next slide about how you can do that in different foods. One way that you might be able to make that a little more possible is this last one, the low sodium salt substitutes. Sometimes it's a sort of 50-50 mixture of half regular salt and half potassium chloride instead of sodium chloride. So it's sort of half potassium, half sodium. And sometimes it's just entirely potassium chloride and there's no actual sodium in it at all. And then you're kind of getting your decreased sodium and your increased potassium together. And if you make people switch to that, it's a good 5-point drop just from switching to that alone. We do know, because they did this in the study, that if you do a salt substitute, you are fine even with kidney disease. CKD3 for sure, and maybe even CKD4. It's only CKD5, that means chronic kidney disease stage 5, which is dialysis, that you really need to be weary about increasing the potassium like this. Again, dialysis diets are a whole nother thing. Talk to your nephrologist about that. I did not dive into that literature. So getting into a little bit of the details of the salt and oh, hang on, let me do that first before I get into the salt and potassium.
I had a question about the raw, just the seed itself. It says there that you need to grind it up, but is there benefits to just eating the chia seed?
So this one's flax seeds, although chia seeds have wonderful health benefits as well, but this specific study was flax seeds. To my knowledge, if you eat the flaxseed by itself, you get some benefit, but most of those blood pressure effects are on the inside. And so then you can't really break it down, so you're just pooping out complete flax seeds, essentially. So that's why we're grinding it up to get those phytochemicals out and exposed to our gut where we can absorb them. Yeah?
Do you want to mention water when you have flaxseed? Because otherwise it gets compacted.
Yes, and actually, I'll briefly mention it now, but I was going to go into that more later, and that's what my little demo up here is going to be about. If you increase your fiber intake, and flaxseed is a fiber food, you have to increase it with water. And I wonder if that's what your doctor was implying, is don't go straight up to huge amounts of flax seeds, because that's a lot of extra fiber you're getting all at once, and you will regret it the next day. So you need to slowly ramp up, and please have enough water with it. Otherwise, yes, it can actually bind you up. With water, it will actually be perfect. It's not too loose, not too hard. It's a good bowel movement you can have. But water is very important to have when you increase your fiber intake. And again, I'll cover that in much more detail in a later slide. Yeah?
Are these effects cumulative?
Good question. I meant to mention that. These effects they're not all cumulative. Some are. For example, you will still get from exercise and a blood pressure, different effects. But obviously, a lot of the salt substitute is probably the DASH diet. Some of the flaxseed might be a similar mechanism of action for some of this, so there is some overlap. It's not necessarily completely cumulative. All right, let's get into just a brief review of pathophysiology. That's all the medical terms that we use to say why. So whose ankles have ever looked like this? the end of a long day, standing a lot, right? And you just get that nice little sock line, it's just a little puffy. The medical term for that, we call it edema. And if you can stick your finger on your leg, I'll do this in the office all the time, hold it there for 10 seconds or so and let go, and you see a dent where your finger was, that's called pitting edema. If it's very slight pitting edema, maybe it's okay, but if you've got significant pitting edema, make sure you've told your doctor about that. Sometimes it could be a sign of a heart problem or a kidney problem. But edema, at least the more mild variant, is often due to a salt and potassium problem. So if you didn't know what your kidneys look like, this is what they look like. We got two right here, sort of just underneath the rib cage, so a little higher than your SI joint there. And inside your kidney are just millions and millions of these tubes all ziggling around, and they're called nephrons. And these things' job is to filter all the water and salt and potassium and other things going through your body. And in short, we're going to again very much simplify this. Sodium and potassium are going back and forth, and they like to follow water. And more specifically, water will also follow the sodium and potassium. Now, I won't go into the details of osmosis for anybody who were biology majors, remember from high school biology class, but essentially, if you move more solute to one side, the water will follow it because the gradients want to be equal. It wants to have an equal concentration on both sides. So you can imagine in your kidneys, if you eat more salt, then your body says, oh shoot, we have too much salt inside our body and not enough in our bladder that we're excreting, so you will actually retain more water. Putting that far more simply, without all the biochemistry, water follows salt. If you eat salt, the water will follow, and you will have ankles like this. If you eat less salt, the water will more easily leave your body, and your ankles will look less like this, depending on your body. And unfortunately, despite this very simple chemical fact, actually 99.4% of Americans have too much salt in their diet. It's a really high number. So pretty much all of us are having too much salt. And then the flip side of this, water follows the sodium, but it doesn't really follow potassium the same way. So you can eat lots of potassium, and it actually helps regulate the sodium and also decreases all the extra swelling and the blood pressure. You can imagine if you're having this ankle line, some of that fluid is also going through your blood vessels and causing high blood pressure. So that's why I'm talking about all this stuff. And a lot of blood pressure problems actually come from the kidney for that reason. So we all need to eat more potassium to compensate for the electrolytes that we're not eating for the sodium. And what do you know? Only 2.5% of Americans are eating adequate potassium in their diet. So we've got a complete flip-flop reversal of what we should be having in our diets. So, oh, and by the way, the recommended daily amount is about 3,400 for males and 2,600 for females. The number for the blood pressure stuff that I showed in the randomized controlled trial was a little bit higher, but this is the recommended daily amount versus the study amount. That's the difference in the numbers there. So you were probably now asking, how do I decrease my sodium and increase my potassium? Do you want to ask your question quick?
Is there a difference in salts? There's sea salt, there's
Excellent.
iodized salt, there's...
Excellent question. In terms of what I am talking about, raising blood pressure and those effects, no difference. There are obviously difference in does it have iodine or not, and does it have some heavy metal contamination or other things like that. For the most part, again, for this, no, salt is salt. Would you have any other answer for that?
Yeah, salt is salt.
Salt is salt, great. All right, so back to our previous question, how do we decrease our salt and increase our potassium? I do have to give credit to this slide to an amazing MD, PhD in nutrition. This talk was largely inspired by her lecture that I attended last year. And she has a website called nutritionprescriptions.com. So if you want to download a PDF and put this on your fridge or something, you can go to that website, although you do have a printed version of it in your handout there. But you can see that sodium is in a lot of foods. So a lot of people think, the first thing I say is, you need to decrease your sodium. And the first thing they always say back is, I don't really use the salt shaker though. It's like, well, I'm sorry to inform you that most of your salt is not from the salt shaker. It is from the things you're already eating. And so some of us know that the canned soups have a lot of salt, and certainly processed foods have it. But you may not know that most bread has a lot of salt. Cheese is loaded with salt. I'm still eating my cheese. I love my cheese. And it has health benefits. So this doesn't mean you can't eat any of these things. It just means that you need to, in moderation, and count the sodium that comes with it, right? And so eating less of these foods and then trying to increase our potassium intake. This is organized in amount of potassium. So number one here is a potato, with the skin, by the way. Most of the potassium is in the skin. That's at 926 milligrams. So if our goal is to get to at least 3,500, you can see you've got to eat a lot of this. And I can personally attest to it's very, very, very hard, if not sometimes impossible, to reach this every day. You have to have, so bananas, right? They have a lot of potassium, 400 milligrams. That's like 8 bananas to get to 3,500. Nobody's eating 8 bananas a day, right? So you can't just have a banana and call it good. Like, you really do have to try to concentrate some of this. One thing that can help, that salt substitute that I talked about before, if you get a potassium chloride instead of a sodium chloride, that's about 690 milligrams in a quarter teaspoon. So there's another potato right there that you can sprinkle on your food. I have not tried potassium chloride myself yet, but I am told it has a slightly more metallic taste. If that is not palatable to you, you could certainly do 50-50 mixture to kind of mix it up a little bit, but maybe you can get used to the taste. I don't know. I can't say I've tried it myself. Have you experimented? Nope. Not willing to risk it yet. Yeah.
So if you had canned chickpeas, I'm assuming they probably have salt in them. Can you rinse them?
Yeah, so canned food very often has salt in it. It's how they're trying to get you to come back and buy more, right? If they put fat, salt, or sugar in it, you like the taste and you buy more. That's part of the buy more mentality that we've all been trapped in these last 50 years. If you look for cans that say no salt, low salt, no salt added, you can actually get it with no salt at all. If you are stuck with, let's say you've got a pantry full of it and you don't want to go throw them away or give them away, rinsing it can reduce the salt. I don't know of any studies that show, but certainly can significantly reduce the salt by a lot. Yep, so that will help. In a soup, you're kind of stuck with it, right? No way to get that out. Yeah?
Yeah, Hannaford has, next to the dried fruit area, they have these packages of mango strips, which are very high in potassium, and one of them doesn't have any sugar.
Good. So she's pointing out some good tips that, like Hannaford's and many other grocery stores will have some really healthy options, like a dried mango strip that has a ton of potassium in it. And if you watch your labels, you can get the one with no added sugar, because a lot of the dried fruit, they were really sneaking in the sugar to try to get you to buy more of it, right? So a lot of good tips here. Increase your potassium, decrease your sodium, and let's go to the next slide. All right, quick game. Which has more sodium, the corn muffin or the wake-up wrap from Dunkin' Donuts? Votes for corn muffin. Raise your hand. 2 or 3. Votes for the wake-up wrap. And anybody have a ballpark guess for the wake-up wrap?
Zillions.
800 and 8,000, somewhere in between those two. Remember from our previous slide, our goal, Americans are often in the 3,000 to 4,000 range. Our goal is less than 2,300. Our ideal is less than 1,500 for blood pressure. You may be shocked to see the answer is actually the corn muffin. We don't think we're having a salty meal, but we absolutely are when we have these muffins. 670 milligrams of sodium. I mean, this isn't great either, but still 590 milligrams of
I thought
sodium.
cheese and bacon wasn't good for you.
Cheese and bacon, well, think about what's in it, right? So the cheese has some good things. It's got some of our dairies, our calciums and such, but then there is a fair amount of saturated fat. Layer that with another red meat saturated fat label that's high in salt, and then there's a lot of carbs there. So I'm only giving you the sodium content, but there's a lot of sugar and unhealthy refined carbs in this as well. So neither of these are good for you. This is just worse. More sodium at least, because we're in the blood pressure part of this. And the diabetes part, that's a whole other thing. Although this probably has more carbs. All right. Another question. Which has more sodium? The Cobb salad or the Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich? Votes for Cobb salad. Votes for the Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich. All right. I see less confidence now. Like, you're trying to trick me, aren't you? How many do you think the Chick-fil-A sandwich has? Give a number guess. Throw it out. A lot. 1,200. I like that guess. All right. 2,220 milligrams in the salad and 1,460 milligrams in the Chick-fil-A sandwich.
Both are very high.
Both are extremely high. Both exceed what I would recommend here, right? That's your entire daily intake of salt in one sandwich, and way more than that for the Cobb salad. So neither of these are healthy, despite it looking so green. So don't trust the appearance. Look at nutrition labels. These food companies are very good at disguising their food to look healthy to get you to buy it. You think you're making the healthy choice, but if you look at it, right? They took the entire chicken thing and they cut it up and put it on top of the salad, right? And then they added an egg, and then they probably salted the heck out of it to make it taste better, right? So they're doing things to this food to make it less healthy for you. And dressing, that's true. A lot. Yeah, the enemy's in the dressing. I think I saw a hand, but it.
That's why I was wondering what made it so good.
Yeah, yep. It's a lot of just the salt they're adding, the dressing, the chicken, all of that stuff. So I cannot say I've actually been in the kitchen, so that's all theories, but not in that kitchen. All right, now this is just a quick heads up. The FDA just approved a new nutrition label. And this is not the back of the package will still look the same as it always has. But most first world countries have a warning label on the front of a package trying to warn us the difference between that and that before we buy it, because a lot of people don't flip it around. And so a front of package nutrition label should be coming, well, it got approved, but no, in the FDA timeline, a couple years from now. But it will tell you very briefly the three things you want to know: the saturated fat content, the sodium content, and the added sugars. And it'll give you a quick medium, high, low with percentages. So that'll just give you a quick eyeball of like, oh, should I steer away from this food? Is this really a healthy choice? Hopefully that'll make people make more informed choices, as informed consumers is the goal there. Yeah.
And when they say 18%, that's 18% of the saturated fat that you should have daily?
Correct. So that is assuming the recommended, here, I'll let you talk on that.
It's based on the serving size. So if you look at the nutrition label, if it's 2/3 of a cup, then that would determine the percent daily value based on that serving size. But yes, you're correct. It is of total recommendation for the day.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, so read those back of the labels more carefully. And if you want to know much more about how to read a nutrition label and get into those details, our Food is Medicine series, what or what not to eat, I think it was that one. The third one of the series goes into the really like how to eat. Actually, I think it was called How to Eat. Yeah, there we go. I got there eventually. All right. So all of you are probably wondering, how much salt do I eat, right? That's one of the natural questions that comes of this. And so I usually tell my patients to try to go home, and I get very few people who actually do, but it's hard, but go home and try to keep a food log for at least 24 hours. And anybody I send to Lexi, I say, please keep a food log for at least 24 to 48 hours. You can hand that to Lexi, and she just has the information up front. You guys can start doing some math and looking at some numbers here. If you do, oh boy, hopefully that can turn back on if somebody can troubleshoot that. But when you are calculating out, you do exactly what it sounds like. Every time you eat a food, look at the back of the label, write down how many milligrams of sodium it is. At the end of the day, total it up and see where your number is. And inevitably you do it and you say, oh, that was just a bad day. Well, then try it a second day or a third day, and you'll start to get kind of an average there. If that is too hard, and it is hard to sit there and write down everything you eat for a day, we're all very busy, there are calculators you can do. I think I wrote the link in there. That was what that image was right there. It was the Big Life CA calculator, I believe it is. And in a 5-minute questionnaire, you can answer a bunch of questions about how you usually eat, and it will estimate back to you how much salt you probably have on a day-to-day basis. So if you don't want to do the 24, 48-hour exactly log thing, then check out that online calculator. That's a helpful way to get a quick estimate of what you're actually eating for sodium and whether you're above or below some of those targets. Yeah?
Is there any sodium in any fruits or vegetables or any unprocessed foods?
There is basically no sodium in fruits and vegetables. I'm sure there's some trace amount in 1 or 2 of them, but to my knowledge, no. When you start to say processed and unprocessed food, that's actually very, very complicated.
I mean, what about a slice of beef that you got in the barn this morning?
Yeah, if it was, we don't have a ton of salt drifting around in beef, so I do not think so. But my answer is always going to be check the nutrition label.
But I mean, in anything totally natural.
Yeah, if you have a totally natural thing, it's like I think there is a small amount. I think we're talking less than 1% though, right? Yeah, so not significant amounts that you need to worry about.
If you're purchasing meats that are marinated,
You're starting at 0. I mean,
yeah, if you're just starting with raw meat, there is a little bit of sodium in it, but not anything that you should not eat it at all.
Or fish or anything like that.
A fish, yeah, like lobster and shrimp. Those would be, ocean creatures, so they would be higher in sodium, but.
Not enough to count?
Count the milligrams.
Yeah, you do. You probably want to read the nutrition labels. See.
Yep. And if, for example, like when I go get a lobster from the market, it doesn't come with a nutrition label, right? You're like, huh? There is nutrition labels for everything. So if you Google it and say nutrition label lobster, somebody has done that study and will count the amount of sodium in it, because we certainly don't have all of those numbers memorized. And I have, again, never seen somebody have so much seafood that they got too high in their sodium content. So I suspect it's not exceeding, but again, I do not know that number off the top of my head. That's true. Well, that's not salt. That's we're talking about gout and uric acid.
Point of view of trying to count your sodium, as
Yep.
long as you're eating totally natural stuff,
Yeah.
you probably don't have anything to count.
So his point was saying that if you're eating totally natural stuff, unprocessed, you probably don't have much to count, and you're absolutely right. You could do a double check and quickly Google the things that you had natural in a day, lobster, whatever, and make sure that it's not a significant amount. But yeah, it's much less likely. Again, it's mostly coming from those processed foods there. All right, so in summary for hypertension, before we take a quick little break, basically you can do any of these treatments, and it doesn't have to be all of them, right? If maybe you only like one or two of these, you can take this home and start practicing it to reduce your blood pressure or recommend it to others who have high blood pressure around you and loved ones. It does reduce heart attacks, strokes, and deaths. That's why we're talking about blood pressure right now, and we've got randomized controlled trials showing that. But then fun fact, if you do not have hypertension, going down on your salt has not been proven in randomized controlled trials to decrease the chance of getting high blood pressure or having heart attacks or strokes and all that. So if you've got a family member who's just blessed with low blood pressure and they're walking around at 110 over 80 all the time, yeah, they're allowed to have the salt, I'm sorry. So at the moment, I'm still living in that golden zone, so I'm enjoying it right now. I don't have to count my sodium yet. And then final thought, listening to this lecture literally has decreased your blood pressure by 3 millimeters of mercury. That's 3 systolic points. We've got 44 randomized controlled trials that show that dietary advice, which this definitely counts as dietary advice today, will lower your blood pressure by about 3 points and also help with your fiber intake and your fat intake and fruits and veggies and all that. So good job. There we go. One other question.
I have a question about the seeds. So what if you have diverticulosis?
So the question was about what about the seeds and if you have diverticulosis. So although it is commonly said and commonly understood that seeds can plug up those little holes in diverticulosis, and for those of you who don't know what that is, that's little outpouchings in your colon that you can see on a colonoscopy. There is no study showing that nuts and seeds will cause diverticulitis flares. That being said, I have a few patients who every time they eat a nut or a seed, they go into a diverticulitis flare. So I would then say to you, kind of like that milk part, if it doesn't work for you, don't take it. But if you don't seem to have problems with it, then you should be able to have it even with diverticulosis, because there are so many health benefits there. So follow your own body. And then for this final muscle strengthening stand-up exercise, I want you all to walk over and use your muscles to pick up some snacks and put them into your mouth and then slowly meander back to your chairs. We got a few minutes, I'll let you do that.
Yeah, it was.
I just wanted to share a few, some information about the muffins that you all hopefully tasted and enjoyed. Those, you all should have the recipe. If you don't, we can certainly get that. Yeah, one thing I want to mention is I actually forgot to put the sugar in the recipe. And I realized afterwards, but they still, I think, taste pretty good. So that is a recipe that I took and modified. And originally it called for white flour, called for butter, and called for a lot more sugar. And so over time I've experimented, and one of the things that I would recommend that you all do is if you do any baking, is to substitute half of your all-purpose flour with whole wheat flour. In doing so, you're increasing a lot of B vitamins. B vitamins are involved in every single metabolic process in the Krebs cycle, which is something that we didn't really go into, but definitely have a lot of health benefits. And also just quarter cup for quarter cup, A quarter cup of whole wheat flour has 3 grams of fiber, and a quarter cup of all-purpose has less than 1. So that's pretty significant, and Dr. Ferracci is going to go more in detail about the benefits of fiber. And then by taking butter and substituting that with the vegetable oil, you significantly reduce the saturated fat. So in a half a cup of butter, which would have been in 1 serving of that recipe, that's about 56 grams of saturated fat. And by switching to the vegetable oil, now it's 8 grams. So it's significantly less, and in my opinion, the quality is still there. Yes?
So would that be a one-to-one swap? Like say a recipe asked for a half a cup, or let's just say for convenience sake, 1 full cup of butter. Could you do a half a cup of butter and a 1-to-1 ratio? Would it be a half a cup of olive oil?
It's not exactly a 1-to-1 switch. So I don't actually have, I should figure that out and put together like the ratio, but it's about a half a cup of butter to a third of a cup of vegetable oil, and then adding some yogurt there can help to create that sort of light, rich flavor that you get from butter too.
Yeah, so maybe somebody has already done that though too.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
You could probably look online. Yeah, I should have printed it out. But then for flour, you can absolutely substitute 1 for 1. But I have noticed that when I use whole wheat flour, it does cook a little faster. So just keeping that in mind, that if you're baking with whole wheat flour, your recipe could be done, 5 minutes earlier. Yes.
With the cooking spray, I don't like it.
Okay.
Is there anything wrong with taking a little vegetable oil and just putting it in?
No. So the question is that she doesn't like cooking spray. It probably adds a flavor that you don't really like. So yeah, you can absolutely use a little bit of vegetable oil. Sometimes I don't find that works super well, but if you find it works, then yeah. But there's a lot of different vegetable oils. You can also get a, like a hand spray one, so you can add oil to like a spray and spray it yourself if you like that flavor better, or try different types.
Why not use the cups, the little bigger cups?
Yeah, so the question is, why not just use the baking cups? Sometimes I don't have very good success with the baking cups, and the muffin sticks to it. So especially when I use like blueberries and things like that, they really stick to that paper, and it can be half the muffin in the cup, and that's, kind of disappointing. But any other questions? Yes.
There's a difference in olive oils too. There's real expensive ones and there's really cheap ones.
What is so cold pressed olive oil is really kind of the best. You want to look for ones that are in like dark colored bottles, and you want to read the nutrition labels because sometimes they can be mixed. So the label in the front could say it's an olive oil, but when you actually read the ingredients, it's a mix of maybe a vegetable oil and an olive oil.
Extra virgin, right?
California olive oil is the best.
I'm sorry?
Some report says California olive oil is one of the best.
California?
California olive oil is one of the best. Yeah, I mean, they certainly grow a lot of olives there, so that would make sense. Same with like Italy. But I guess you can get it in Spain and lots of places. So I haven't actually seen any studies to say which one is the best, but definitely
Anything else, which is
yeah, they're not altering it, which is important. Any other questions? Okay.
All right. Those are some good questions. Some thoughts that crossed my mind when I heard you guys talking. One of the only downsides to olive oil, extra virgin olive oil and stuff, because it's got so many health benefits, is that it doesn't do very well at very high heats. So if you're doing high heat cooking, high heat baking, it sometimes just browns and burns. I've ruined a couple foods that way. If you're looking for a healthier substitute for a high heat oil, I mean, you certainly could use a canola oil or a vegetable oil, but as I said, those are a little higher in the omega-6s. Avocado oil does great at high temperatures and has little to no flavor. It is more expensive, so save it for your high heat stuff if you really want to make that switch. I think there was one or two other good ones too, but those are the two off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And if you want, we have extra muffins. If you want to meander while I'm talking and grab a second blueberry muffin, they are in your packets. It was the loose leaf paper that has the recipe for that there. Yeah, I thought it had sugar in it.
Yeah,
oops. Right? There we go. All right. So now we're going to talk about hyperlipidemia, which is the term for high cholesterol. And I'm going to start talking a little faster because as usual, I keep on talking and watching my time. So high cholesterol, in short, there is LDL and HDL. HDL stands for high density and LDL stands for low density lipoprotein, or as you have probably heard your doctor say, the good cholesterol and the bad cholesterol. Now we need cholesterol to live. This is what cholesterol looks like in your body. It's basically a ball of fat. Cholesterol is a fat surrounded by more fats, and it shuttles around your body and moves fat around, which we do need to have happen. And I kind of imagine it like a road where the LDL and HDL particles of the car are zooming around and the arteries are our road. But just like a road, if you have too many car accidents along the way, LDL particles are bumping on the edges, eventually you can start to build up this fatty plaque. And it turns out that the more LDL you have, the more plaque you are likely to accumulate over the years. So that's why this is the bad cholesterol. The HDL does not have that same association. So you can have a high HDL, and that actually takes the plaque and tries to remove it a little bit. And if you're asking, well, can I increase my HDL and make my plaque better? The answer is no. They have studied it. Increasing HDL, although it is generally good if you have a higher HDL, increasing it artificially does not help. But we do know from many studies that decreasing LDL is a good thing. If we decrease your LDL, we know that causes less plaques, and we know that causes less heart attacks or strokes. So we're going to be talking about LDL numbers for this talk, because that's really the important part of your cholesterol. So what is your LDL? Well, just the average American, the average adult, is about 116 milligrams per deciliter. You can hop on your MyChart if you're my patient or somebody else's patient and see what your most recent LDL is. Really what we should be is in the 50 to 70 range. This is what we are when we're little kids or babies and haven't started eating terrible food yet. Or if you look at indigenous populations eating natural foods, it's way down here. It's pretty common that I see somebody in the 120, 130 range. For a long time, I just called that normal, which is kind of sad. I just got so used to seeing it, it became my normal. And then once we start getting to the 150s, 160s, that's getting pretty high. And although I didn't put it in this graph, 190 is like a red alert, put them on a cholesterol medication right away. So your doctor will get very surprised if your LDL is 190. So which is the most effective to treat your LDL? Again, for time's sake, I'm just going to give you the answer here. Although it is a food is medicine talk, again, I have to admit, we have some really good medicines in the current century. Atorvastatin, that's Lipitor, a medium dose of 20 milligrams will drop your LDL by 50 points. That is why your doctor is always harping about your cholesterol meds, is they really do work. They're fantastic. But that doesn't mean that you can just take a pill and forget about the other stuff, because this other stuff has so many other health benefits. And what if you're one of these, 110, 120? You don't need a 50-point drop. You just need to go down 10 or 20 points, and that's really where we can use the food as our medicine here. So, little surprise to anybody, exercise works really, really well. They give you the cheat sheet for this. Exercise works very, very well, and that has to be the USDA exercise stuff that I just talked about, 45 minutes, 3 times a week. And then aerobic also helps, plus or minus strength training, depending on what you want to do. So somebody was asking about almonds, and that's why I put some almonds out there today. There are good randomized studies showing that if you have, and yes, it is a full cup of almonds, and it's not just almonds actually, it's any nut type, could be peanuts, could be cashews, whatever you want, but any 1 cup of any nut will decrease your LDL by 33 points. I didn't believe the study at first, but that can't be right. But then after reading enough RCTs, like, okay, that's right, that's a real study. All right, nuts decrease cholesterol, and it's a dose dependent, this is per day. Now, I decided on reading this that although I was going to increase my nut consumption, I didn't want to increase it that much, because a cup of almonds is like, was it 600 calories or something? It's like half of my daily calories. Like, no thank you, I don't want to spend that many of my calories on nuts. So it is a dose response. If you even just have a quarter cup, just a handful, that's maybe double of what you just had, that'll still bring you down 5 points right there. So you do not have to have a full cup, but if you want the full 33-point drop, then yes, you do have to have a cup for that kind of impressive drop there. So somebody had asked earlier, is it possible to overdo nuts? Well, from an LDL point, no, the more the better, but then you're watch your calorie counting. Although it is a nutrient-dense food, that is still a lot of nuts at that point. This actually is exactly relevant to what we were just talking about. So all of these are soy things. These are soybeans, soy milk, tofu. And the study shows that if you swap 47 grams of an animal-based protein, and I mean, I'm not vegetarian or vegan, so I don't want to knock that too much. If you want a little bit of meat, that's okay. But if you take, let's say, 47 grams of that butter, and actually that's that example, but animal protein, and switch it for a soy protein, you will get a 22-point drop in your LDL. That swap that we just made, 3 tablespoons of butter for olive oil instead, 15-point drop in your LDL. So this is where the plant-based movement has really come from, and arguably I can stand by this and say, yeah, plant-based protein is healthier than animal-based protein. Lower LDL, lower cholesterol. Again, we don't need to be 100% exclusive with this though. You do not have to be a 100% plant-based diet. You could be, over half of your protein is plant-based, and you're still gonna get a lot of those benefits. So we don't need to be black or white about this. You can go somewhere in between. You do not have to be vegetarian or vegan to get some of these benefits. Just a simple one swap during the day will give you some of that benefit. Yeah?
How big is 47 grams of protein?
Help me with that. I'm not so good with my... You said in the muffin it was 49?
So,
grams?
so 47 grams of animal soy protein. So a chicken breast is about 3 ounces, is about the palm of my hand. That's about,
Here you go, sorry.
so a chicken breast would be about 3 ounces, the palm of my hand, and that would be about 25, 30 ounces, 30 grams, pardon me, so.
I'm sorry, one more question. With the medicine, I've heard before that if you start taking high blood pressure medicine or cholesterol medicine, that you can't stop. You have to keep taking it. Is that true?
No. I mean, it's true in that if you stop the med, your cholesterol or blood pressure will go back to what it naturally would be. But if you have, before you ate not well and had a ton of salt and all that stuff, and then you stop the meds and you've made all these dietary changes, it may not go up that much. So by no means are you like addicted on it or stuck on it. You could always stop it and see what happens. If somebody has told you to start cholesterol medication and your cholesterol, your LDL was above 150, it's hard to get, and you'll show you in the next slide, it's hard to get that LDL down naturally with diet alone more than 40 points. So that's where I start to say, yeah, maybe you should stay on the meds. Of course, you could stop it, but then you're going to lose the health benefits of reducing that LDL. And then the final one, I was harping on fiber. I would like you to get it in diet. Diet is the best way to get fiber, and that's all the chia seeds and the nuts and legumes and the beans specifically. But it's hard, again, to randomize people to eating more fiber, so we've done it with fiber supplements, where if you have 10 grams of fiber a day, additional to what you're already eating, you can drop your LDL by 13 points. That's a soluble fiber. Not an insoluble, and it doesn't matter if you do decide to supplement. This is what the study said. You could do the Metamucil or Benefiber, whatever brand you want. The powder stuff is the cheapest. You mix it in your drink and drink it. But I hate drinking my medicine. They make gummy versions and cookie versions, so I have my fiber gummies every night. In addition to the high fiber diet, I definitely am eating as well. And then the note that we were sort of hinting at before, make sure you have it with water. And increase slowly. So if you go home and say, my Dr. Faraci's right, I'm gonna eat a bunch of flaxseed and chia seed and beans, and tomorrow you're gonna hate me. You're gonna be bloated and gassy and in pain and constipated, and just, you're not gonna feel good. Because the buddies in your belly are like, oh wow, an all-style like buffet. I haven't eaten this in forever, and they're just gonna go crazy and make a bunch of extra gas. So temper your excitement, add a little bit, every week, and you'll be a little bit more gassy, but then it'll level out. And eventually you can get up to like 30, 40, 50 grams of fiber in a day with no extra gassiness. You just have to be slow and deliberate how you get up there. Of course, I have had a few patients who have tried their darndest to do that, and for whatever reason, their gut doesn't like fiber. That is possible. I can't explain it, but I've had a few people that it's just not working. So again, follow your body. If it's not working, it's not working. But for the vast majority of us, we can slowly increase fiber with amazing benefits. I really wanted to do I'm gonna skip the demo, but I had a cool demo with a sponge and a PVC pipe. And if I try to put fiber into the PVC pipe, it ain't working. But you can imagine if you get this all watery, it slips right through that pipe. So that's remember to drink your water with your fiber, folks. All right. Keep on going here. So this is, again, just showing that lots of foods have fiber. Lots of foods will decrease your LDL. But again, it's a partially additive. They are not cumulative. So when you look at somebody who's eating a truly strict, diet with only plant-based stuff, maybe a 35, 40-point drop is all you're going to get. So it's the 80-20 rule applies, right? Take what you like out of those two slides and add those to your diet, and you can get a 30-point drop. And if your LDL is 190, please start a cholesterol medicine. Food is not quite enough for that one. All right, so in general and summary, these things will increase your LDL. These things will decrease your LDL. That's why we talk about moderation. Despite having this in my slide, I still ate Oreo cookies the other night. Really like them. And again, this lecture helps too. 6-point drop in your LDL just from listening to these slides. So good job, guys. All right, I'm going to breeze by this one again for time's sake because I talk too much, but walking is a great way to get some activity. Moderate intensity would be that you're having trouble talking while having a sentence. And we do this Walk with the Doc program that will be starting off in the spring. I'm one of the walkers on Monday. And you can come and walk with me for 30 minutes and get some of your daily exercise. And we have a different doctor at all the main health sites here at Midcoast. And if you want more about that, there will be flyers coming out and so on and so forth. All right, diabetes, high blood sugar. If you've heard things like the pancreas and insulin, basically in short, the pancreas makes insulin, and insulin's job is to take all that sugar floating around in your bloodstream and to put it away in the cells. So that way it's not floating in the bloodstream. Because although we need sugar to survive, we need glucose to survive, it is a very inflammatory molecule. So when it's bouncing around, it can cause damage. It can cause damage to the blood vessels. It can cause nerve damage. It can cause blindness and kidney disease and all these nasty things. So that's why we do a lot of extra tests for our diabetic patients. And we're going to be talking about something called the hemoglobin A1C, which is basically when we look at your red blood cells, if there's a lot of sugar there, it actually sticks to the red blood cells. And then we can study your red blood cell in a test tube, because a red blood cell has about a 120-day half-life. And if we can see more sugar stuck to it, then we can say, oh, in the last 90 days, this is the average blood sugar that's been floating around in your body. So an A1C is a really nice way of looking at your general blood sugar level that didn't depend on whether you fasted or not. It's looking at the 3-month average. So all about A1Cs. What is the most effective treatment for diabetes and that high blood sugar and that A1C? Cutting straight to the chase. Again, meds are very helpful. Even metformin gets you down. That's a 2,000 milligrams. That's a standard max dose of metformin. You can even do a little bit more, 1.4, 1.1 for the 1,000 milligram. That'll get you down a full 1.1 A1C. And I should back up and define for a second that an A1C above 6.5 is diabetes, 6.5 and above, and a 5.7 to 6.4 is pre-diabetes. And everybody else should be an A1C of below 5.7. So a 1.1 drop is pretty good. That could bring you to almost diabetic to back to normal there. Exercise, again, is fantastic, 0.9 drop. This one I do want to spend just a few seconds on, a 1.5 hemoglobin A1C drop. That's rivaling, actually exceeding metformin, which is really good. Now, what is this actually, this time-restricted eating stuff, this intermittent fasting, as a lot of people call it? There is no actual magic to intermittent fasting or fasting a certain number of hours. When you really get into the data and the randomized controlled studies, it's all just a form of calorie restriction. So if you were fasting for 8 hours a day, that's just less hours that you can cram the calories in. So when they've really done these studies, it's all just calorie counting. So if you would prefer calorie counting than paying attention to the clock, feel free to do that. That works equally as well. For a lot of people, it's really hard to calorie count, and it's much easier to say, the kitchen closes at 6 p.m. and then to stop eating after 6, right? That is a form of calorie restriction. So that's been studied really well. And again, make up whatever times work in your schedule, but a 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. fast is a very common intermittent fasting quote there. There's another one that actually had pretty good randomized controlled trials, the 5-2 diet. And now that means that 5 days of the week you eat as you normally would with no time restrictions, but 2 days of the week you're essentially fasting, like 500 calories or less, preferably just fruits or vegetables, very simple stuff. And again, calorie restriction, you're like 4,000 calories in the hole for that week, right? And so people will actually get a 1.5 A1C drop from that alone. So different ways you can play with your schedule. And this is why people say, oh, this worked for me, that worked for me. And the answer is it truly is what works for you. You can't just find the thing on the fad diet. You have to see with your schedule and your diet and your patterns and preferences, what works for you. There's the whole glycemic index thing, which is basically saying that when you eat a food, you can have a sugar spike or have it slowly release as you digest it. And really, when you look at that, that's low carbs or less sugar is what it's talking about. And then equally as important, and I would argue more important, because this was only looking at 18 grams of fiber a day, and we're supposed to have 30 grams, really, we can, again, see a 0.5 A1C drop. Now, I have a few more slides, but I do want to be sensitive for time. If you need to leave, it is 7 o'clock. So if you need to go, feel free to do that. But if anybody wants to listen to the last 5 minutes here, I'm going to go blitz through. Are we okay with that? Okay, sorry for the bad pacing. I get excited about talking. All right, so glycemic index. This is a very simplified version of the glycemic index, which is you eat something and a bunch of sugar can get released. And if it has a low glycemic index, that means the sugar spike is lower. So we can all probably guess that ice cream has a very high glycemic index, right? You eat that and that's immediately sugar and going through your body. However, although there is some benefit to thinking about glycemic index, I don't want you to put too much attention on it because the studies really show that this is more about the nutrient-dense foods. Because ice cream is literally just pure sugar, and you're immediately metabolizing that. There's not many other health benefits in ice cream, maybe some calcium, and that's about it. But if you get something like lentils, that has a ton of sugar in it, actually, like a huge amount of carbs, right? Carbs in ice cream, carbs in lentils. But nobody would tell you, oh my gosh, look out for that lentil sugar spike, right? Nobody says that. And again, I've never seen diabetes or health effects from eating too many lentils. So it's because, and why is that? There's protein and nutrients and fiber, right? And so it slows it down. You get all these other benefits. So those carbs are just not digested the same way. They're going to the buddies in your belly instead of to the rest of your body. So I really want, instead of focusing too much on glycemic index, focus on the nutritional quality of the food. That's far more important than a glycemic index per se. So that's why a lot of the carb counting has kind of faded, is it depends on the carb and what else is in it. So it's not as simple as just counting the carbs. The folks who are counting carbs and then saying no to an apple because it has too many carbs, that breaks my heart. It's an apple, please eat it. That doesn't count as a carb. All right, so back to our quick reminder, carbohydrates, we had the sugars and the starches. So again, as a reminder, just giving you some numbers. Our bread, we can guess, has a lot of carbs, 30 grams of carbs in 2 slices. A thing of ice cream, 19 grams of carbs in a serving of ice cream. It might surprise you, again, 12 grams of carbs in a cup of milk. But again, that's a lower glycemic index because there are some fats and proteins in it. And most people would tell you the glass of milk is healthier than the ice cream. Keep on going here, and we get into the fiber again, but still technically carbs. Those lentils I mentioned, 40 grams of carbs. So if you're carb counting, I've seen people say, you know what, I have to go have the bread instead of the lentils. It's like, oh no. Again, the carb counting's got it all wrong. Look at all the fiber and nutrients and stuff we're getting from the lentils, and they literally sucked that out of the white bread to sell it to you. So, no, that's not quite how it works. Look at that nutrient density. And again, bananas, 27 carbs. Oh, and I should mention that lentils, 16 grams of fiber. So think about how many carbs of those are actually the healthy carbs, the fiber that's feeding the buddies in our belly. Banana, more like 3 grams of fiber, and all these other things as well. So then that brings us to this slide. What has fiber in it? So this is also in your packet, because this I hand out to my patients quite frequently. A diet rich in fruits and veggies will get you a bunch of fiber, usually between 2 to 5 grams in a serving. So you can have a cup of blueberries would be 3 or 4 grams of fiber. However, we are trying to get to the 25, even 30 grams of fiber a day range. And although that's what the RDA shows, studies, especially of indigenous populations, again, eating natural diets right now, they're up at 60, 70 grams of fiber a day. So we really evolved to eat more than 30 grams of fiber a day. So the recommended daily amount is not a limit saying you can't have more, it's a minimum. You should try to have this and more if you can, especially in regard to fiber. So again, looking at this is part of why fruits and vegetables are healthy. They all have a lot of fiber, as well as nutrient-dense food. Once we start getting into the grainy things and the nuts, we start going up 6, 7, 8, 9 grams. And this is 1 avocado, 1 cup of oats, half a cup of almonds. But you can see in order to get to 30 grams of fiber or more a day, that's a lot of fruits and vegetables and barley you gotta eat, right? Really, in order to make the math work, you gotta add some form of beans or lentils or split peas. This is where the money is, 19 grams in 1 cup. And you can see all the numbers there. So I was not really a bean person growing up. These last 2 years, I have forced myself to become a bean person, and I am finally starting to like it. It does take practice. I really just started mixing it and hiding it in recipes so I can get a little bit of those benefits there. But we should be trying to add more plant-based protein, more fiber to our diets for some of those benefits. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that if you do have diabetes and you are carb counting, you can subtract the fiber from the carbs to basically decrease the number of carbohydrates, if that makes sense.
Yep, and I've actually seen a couple of food labels doing that, where the net carbs is a big thing, right? So that's what some of that net carbs is. I mean, yeah, you can do it, but again, if it's got a ton of fiber, don't even count it as carbs, right? Like that, those aren't the carbs that we're really worried about necessarily here. Briefly, just talking about, well, hang on, whole grain, refined grain, you guys might have heard me say that. This is what the modern food industry has done, is they have taken a whole, let's say this is a head of wheat, right? And this is the seed. They have taken this original seed and they rip off the bran, which has all the fiber and nutrients in it. They suck out the germ, which has all the antibodies and vitamins and healthy fatty acids, and they turn it into the endosperm, which is literally just a sugar ball. And then they add more sugar to it and then turn it into a bread and give it to you. So this is what we have done to ourselves the last 50 years, is we have processed the heck out of everything. And so that's what we say when we say whole grain versus refined grain, is they have refined it with all these machineries. And of course this has more fiber, that has less fiber and more added sugars. That's all that processed stuff. And in fact, it was so bad for us that after they did this and started making all these refined foods, Americans started getting sick. And I mean like scurvy, pellagra, like all these diseases that we don't really see anymore, because they had taken all the nutrients out of all the food that we were all eating for the last century. And so the federal government actually mandated that they have to put a few of the vitamins back in, so that way you stop making Americans sick. And so this is, you can see the green is the whole wheat, the natural nutrients that are in the grain. And then we can see what we did when we got rid of it, refined it, and then they have to enrich it. So you'll see the word enriched. That's when they artificially added back your thiamine, your riboflavin, your folate, et cetera. And thank goodness we stopped having neural tube defects and the diseases that we had to quite that amount. But I would argue, rather than remove it and artificially put only a few back in, let's just keep the original whole grain, right? Stop processing our food. That would be really helpful. And again, our third lecture from last year's talk, we'll talk about how you might think you're buying whole wheat, but you look at the back, it's only 5% whole wheat and it's 95% highly refined wheat. So they are literally tricking you. So be careful with breads. Look for the fiber content. Look at that nutrition label. So again, in summary, eat less of the refined things, eat more of the fiber, natural things. You have dropped your A1C by 0.3 points by listening to this lecture. You're welcome. And just as a quick thing, we are eating, right, because we all want to live and be healthy in our life, but we also have to have a little pleasure too, right? I still had my Oreo cookies the other day, just in moderation, And so in summary, our final slide, and if you've ever read Michael Pollan's book, he literally summed up this entire lecture in 7 words. Eat food, like actually food, not processed crap that's been all artificially changed. Not too much of it, watch the quantity, do some intermittent fasting or calorie restriction, and mostly plants. You can have some animals, but mostly plants. That's where a lot of those health benefits in there are as well. And that's in summary. And I think we're good. That's the end of the talk. Ooh, okay.